Welcome to Past Paradise. In today's episode, we explore Mary of Teck, Queen of England, whose poise and stoicism hid a life of personal turmoil and royal duty. In the early 20th century, Mary's unshakable loyalty to the monarchy was tested by Edward VIII's 1936 abdication. Edward's abdication for Wallace Simpson shocked the British Empire and devastated Mary's heart, which never mended. We'll discuss Mary's complicated relationship with Edward, the strain she felt keeping the royal family together, and her influence on the current monarchy. The newest historical discoveries and newly discovered letters shed light on this great queen's legacy, her profound sense of duty, and her sacrifices for the crown. Mary of Teck, a queen with a captivating and sad life, will be examined in detail. The royal family's shadowy side. Many have had fantasies as children of becoming princesses and enjoying the opulence that accompanied royal status. Many thought Mary of Teck was among the fortunate ones to have been able to realize this ambition when she was born on May 26, 1867. Regretfully, they could not have been more mistaken. Mary wasn't welcomed with the same warmth as her cousin, even though she was born in the same chamber as Queen Victoria. Mary had a bit more complex family than usual since her parents were seen as less genuine children. Unfortunately, problems with the bloodline from birth usually indicate that things will grow much worse. Retracing our steps to the top. Mary's parents weren't of the proper lineage, according to rumors that her heritage belonged to the shady side of the royal family. Although the royals didn't like this fact, if they had adhered to other royal requirements, they may have been able to overlook it. Sadly, such was not the case. It turns out that Mary's mother enjoyed all things opulent. She wanted it and got it, even if it was pricey. This also featured elaborate feasts that gave her a body to match and earned her the moniker Fat Mary. Her mother's extravagant spending put them in hot trouble in 1883, forcing the family to leave the nation. Not only had Mary's parents' reputations been destroyed overnight, but so had their daughters. Mary had no idea what she was going to get. The Tecks were back in England within 2 years after leaving debts behind. Her parents had both made dubious decisions in their private lives. Regrettably, they didn't vary in their parenting approach. Living a more stable existence after returning would have been expected, but Mary was never sure which parent she would be with. Her parents used to call her May and were joyful and kind to her on certain days. But suddenly, their attitudes would shift and their grins would vanish. Mary feared her parents because of their unpredictable mood swings, but nothing could have prepared her for what was next. And extreme issues started to emerge. Mary's parents seemed to behave without first considering things. They were blind to its consequences on little Mary's future. She felt much pressure to get married and have a family as she grew older. This would have been simple for other young ladies, but Mary had many problems. Mary was not permitted to wed anybody since, in theory, she belonged to the royal family. But her parents' divisive decisions and her convoluted lineage ensured she would never meet a real nobleman. Sadly, Mary's physical attributes also didn't work in her favor. As you may imagine, the little princess was saddened and humiliated to learn that others around her saw her as being very German-looking and frumpish. Fortunately, things were about to get better. Her status became a point of sale. Mary didn't know anybody when she would be married and went into her 20s. She had no idea that what many saw as a weakness would soon become her greatest asset. She was the only single princess in Britain at the time, and Queen Victoria's grandson needed a spouse. The Tecks were positioned at the top of the social hierarchy when the Queen spoke Mary's name. Prince Albert Victor was second in line for the throne and the most eligible bachelor in England. Mary's situation seemed to improve if only she knew of the nightmare she was about to enter. There were rumors following the prince's image. Mary looked like she had struck gold when she married Prince Albert Victor, the eldest son of the Duke of Wales. She was unaware that Prince Albert Victor was remaining unmarried for a purpose. According to history, he had been characterized as densely stupid and amiable but indecisive by many, which also included a lengthy number of rumors. Several people suspected the prince was Jack the Ripper, while others felt he had a hidden love child and had been associated with night walkers. For some reason, Mary persisted despite hearing terrible things about her soon-to-be husband. Instead of marriage, something tragic occurred. Like many weddings in this period, Prince Albert and Mary's marriage would not be based on love. Instead, it would serve the nation's interests and future better. Mary dutifully accepted Prince Albert's proposal in Luton Hoo, a rural house. The preparations for the wedding started, but really, they should have been arranging for a burial. Many people died during a severe influenza pandemic in the 1890s, including Mary's fiancé. A few days after turning 28, Prince Albert became unwell and died. The prince's last remarks didn't assist Mary, whose emotions had been on an emotional roller coaster for the past 2 weeks. Bidding farewell to someone he felt something for. When Prince Albert became sick, the virus had already taken numerous lives. He knew his survival odds were low, even though many thought he was densely stupid. In an ideal world, he would have contacted his fiancée in the last hours of his life to provide consolation. But when has anything ever gone exactly as planned for Mary? Prince Albert wanted to bid farewell to the one person he cared about, an unidentified ex-lover, rather than asking for Mary. This treachery may have shattered some, but Mary had endured worse. Many would even argue that she had the last word in what she did after that. Mary turned it into a family event. Mary entered a state of grief upon the death of Prince Albert. She was weeping not only for his passing, but also for the possibility of marrying him. Mary and Prince Albert's younger brother experienced just that, a reunion brought about by losing a loved one. Not only did they get along well, but they also helped each other out throughout this trying period. You may wonder what Queen Victoria was up to in this depressing period. Well, her only concern was ensuring the succession. She saw more in Mary and Prince George than merely two individuals helping each other. No, she assured the family's rule would continue and saw the next pair in line for the throne. The royals had to plan their performance. The loss of Prince Albert had united Mary and George, but both of them were pretty bashful when Queen Victoria's intentions for them were made public. Actually, they spent much of the time staring at each other across the room at a safe distance away. It was well known that the pair would become engaged, but it was difficult to predict when or how. The royal family eventually had to intervene and advise George to accompany Mary to gaze at the frogs in the pond. This expedited the process and ultimately provided Queen Victoria with much-needed news. Her new outfit was a turnhead. Mary believed that by bidding Prince Albert farewell, she was also bidding adieu to her dreams of getting married and starting a family. Thus, she gladly accepted George's proposal when he made it a few months later. As the other family members sighed with relief, Mary began organizing a new wedding. Making a new wedding dress was part of planning a new marriage. Mary wore a garment adorned with Honiton lace and a diamond tiara that the Queen had given her as she made her way down the aisle on July 6, 1893. It was not only a stunning ceremony, it would also develop into an equally stunning relationship. Nobody had high expectations for the royal match. Many people thought Mary and George's marriage was just for convenience when word got out. It was the deal with his brother since there had been an arrangement with Albert. People didn't anticipate much from the two awkward youngsters who could hardly stand near to one another. Many people were unaware that the pair was deeply in love with one another. Furthermore, they would stay in this state for the remainder of their lives. George would never even consider having a mistress. Nevertheless, their love tale was everything from simple and easy. Years of contentment at home. Marriage was not motivated by love at this time. Rather, marriage was about ensuring that the family line continued to flourish and about mutual gain. The first few years of their marriage were filled with domestic happiness since Mary and George really cared for each other. Even though they were the Prince and Princess of Wales, they had a somewhat modest existence. They were busy creating a family together, therefore they weren't thinking about the throne, but rather each other. We can see why they were a bit distracted. After all, they had 6 kids. Unfortunately, tragedy was about to interrupt their joyful run. Mary's youngest son was having serious issues. Mary had given birth 5 times before, but none of them had been as horrible as her last pregnancy. She went through an extremely trying period that challenged her body physically and psychologically. Although she recovered completely, tiny Prince John did not have the same success. Although John was a bit more delicate than usual and sometimes had breathing difficulties, there didn't appear to be any reason for alarm. Nevertheless, Mary discovered their presumptions were incorrect when he was 4 years old. Her joyful, playful toddler had become winsome and painfully slow, and an epilepsy diagnosis was made after his first significant episode. Mary was completely taken aback by John's prognosis and was unsure of how to respond to it. Mary took extreme precautions to keep her family safe because she wanted time to decide what to do next. They maintained Prince John's silence. Some think Mary did what she did next for one of 2 reasons, if not both. After John's diagnosis, Mary and George decided to keep their son out of the spotlight for many years. Given the fast decline in John's condition, this choice might have been taken with his best interests in mind. But it's possible that they took this stance to preserve their family's good name. Many ailments were unknown at the time, including their origins and consequences. Because of this, they were seen as a weakness as well as the simplest method to embarrass a family. Sadly, Mary didn't have to keep her son's illness a secret for very long. Her calm life broke through to the inside. Mary and George had always imagined themselves as king and queen one day, but managing John's illness meant they already had a lot on their hands. So on May 6, 1910, George's father passed away, and they had to bid adieu to their peaceful and straightforward existence. Leaving behind their titles as prince and princess meant taking on a whole new set of duties. It was true that no one could have adequately prepared them for these duties. Soon after taking the throne, the newly crowned king and queen encountered their first obstacle. Nobody received special attention. Mary and George attempted to balance managing a nation with caring for a sick kid. They didn't anticipate that the amount of work they had on their plate would just keep getting more. One of the most terrifying experiences of the 20th century was seeing their countrymen thrown into the midst of World War I in 1914. Mary decided to ration the palace like everyone else rather than merely standing by and letting everyone else suffer. She also insisted on bidding farewell to the dying troops while doing their duties. Things were just getting started, and the Queen was beginning to feel the strain. Blood was on Mary's hands. Not only did the Russian Emperor Romanov dynasty have to manage a global war, but they also had to deal with a revolution. The family contacted Mary and George because they needed a secure hiding location while they worked to restore control over their people. Given their cousin's relationship with Tsar Nicholas II, the Russian family thought they would be safe in England. Regretfully, they could not have been more mistaken. Unaware that they were signing the Romanovs' death sentence, Mary and George turned down their request. The Russian Imperial Romanov family was said to have died in the revolution a few months later. Things were rapidly deteriorating. Tragic events triggered an unexpected feeling. Mary detested seeing her son in that manner, even though she had become used to John's condition. He had the largest seizure of his life at the age of 13. Unfortunately, he never fully recovered, and on January 18, 1919, he died. Naturally, Mary was grieved to learn of her son's demise and wrote that it was a great shock. Nevertheless, she was emotionally and physically spent on caring for her son and concealing his illness. Though she didn't have much time to recover, Mary admitted to a friend that saying farewell to him had also been a great relief. George's lungs were weak. Mary failed to make use of her chance to rescue the Romanov family. The king was burdened by this reality much more than the queen was. George had said farewell to his kid, abandoned his family, and guided his nation through a global war in the first few years of his reign. The king was under immense strain, and smoking was the one thing that made it easier to handle. Regretfully, this resulted in him rapidly developing weaker lungs from excessive smoking. In 1928, the king's health started to decline, causing the public to see him battle septicemia, bronchitis, and many other ailments. Mary refused to abandon her husband in the face of all the other events. She wouldn't commit the same errors again. Being a parent is challenging, particularly when you're also attempting to govern your nation. Mary was aware that she had fallen short of the ideal mother, particularly in regard to her son's illness and epilepsy. She thus saw a chance to improve when the king's health began to decline. She had not only grown from her errors, but she had also resolved to not make the same ones again. Mary thus turned into her husband's most resolute caregiver. She saw to it that George was fed, rested, and taken care of. The doctor replied, "The Queen," when asked who had rescued the king. Despite their best efforts, George's condition didn't improve. Their affection was profound. The people of England had never seen a friendship like that between the king and queen. Even though they enjoyed maintaining appearances, it was obvious that they were much in love. If there were any question about it, their 1935 Silver Jubilee saw George clear the air. There wasn't a dry eye in the house as the king's address for his bride was read aloud during the ceremony. Regretfully, George refrained from reading the letter since he didn't believe he could read it without sobbing. "When I consider everything I owe the Queen, I cannot trust myself to speak of her," he remarked. Nothing felt quite right. Mary was exerting every effort to restore her husband's health. Even while at first her efforts were yielding apparent results, the king was obviously worn out. His body felt sluggish and weary from fighting virus after infection without a respite. Regretfully, he had a cold on January 15, 1936, from which he would never fully recover. Following 5 days of intermittent awareness, Dr. Lord Dawson made a daring declaration. A few hours after he sent out the official notice, which said that the king's life is moving peacefully toward its close, the king passed away, and Mary had to bid farewell to her one and only real love. She had no idea that his death wasn't due to natural causes. An attempt to maintain his honor. Mary was understandably quite preoccupied since she had just lost her spouse. Others who were there when the king passed away, however, couldn't help but sense something wasn't quite right. The doctor raced away rather than remaining to console the queen and her family on their loss. It turns out that his peculiar conduct has a dark motive. The king had died from a deadly morphine injection rather than from a cold. The doctor found it hard to see George suffer, since he knew things would only grow worse. He said that the only way to allow the king to die with honor was to put him to death. His needle was most definitely not in the correct spot, even if his heart could have been. The tragedies in Mary's family were not finished. Mary had now said farewell to 2 dear ones with her husband's death. That would have caused enough grief in a lifetime, but the disasters kept happening. Mary became Queen Dowager after George's death. This showed the public that she was a widow who inherited her late husband's status. Edward VIII, her oldest son, was ready to ascend to the throne in his due place. Sadly, he did little to please his parents. Rather, he is now notorious for leading one of the worst reigns. Mary was now in a very difficult situation. Edward was the root of the whole constitutional crisis. Mary and George had many challenges while she was in power. This meant they often had to make tough choices about their nation's destiny. Regretfully, Edward's priorities upon assuming the throne were his future rather than the future of his people. His selection of the Queen was his first poor choice as king. Edward had a desire to wed Wallis Simpson, who was divorced. The state, Mary, and the church were all against the couple enjoying this joyous period. As Queen Dowager, Mary did not hide her feelings about Wallace and Edward. Mary declined to have a private meeting with her in addition to one in public. As you may expect, things in this relationship rapidly became quite problematic. Mary had an infatuation with royal item. Mary was fixated on royal jewels when she wasn't fixated on her son's bad judgment of ladies. Her favorite pastime was collecting any treasures that caught her eye. Whether they came from the Dowager Empress Marie of Russia's estate or the royal coffers, Mary needed to get them. Regretfully, Mary's infatuation knew no bounds, so she could always have what she desired. This included purchasing an emerald collection for 3 times the market value. It may surprise you that this wasn't the wildest thing she performed to get something exquisite. Face-to-face, outrageous demands were made. Over time, Mary's fixation with diamonds seemed to expand to any attractive home objects. She was wealthy and powerful, but even so, she would avoid paying for any of these things if she could. One of her favorite strategies while attempting to do things right was to declare loudly how much she appreciated something. She hoped that after hearing it, the host would donate the item to their queen. It's undoubtedly not a good appearance for a nation's leader, but what happened next was far worse. People began to speculate about Mary's collecting habits, supposing she was a kleptomaniac. Although these are only rumors, nobody knew how far she would go. One more tragic event in the lifetime of tragedies. Although Mary had enjoyed an exciting and joyous life, tragedy had also plagued her years. With the latest tragedy occurring in 1952, it seemed as if the catastrophes had continued happening. Due to complications from his lung operation, Mary had to say goodbye to her second oldest son in this year of his life. Not only was it her last catastrophe, but also the one that almost brought her down. Mary confided in a friend, saying, "I have lost 3 sons, but I have never been privileged to be there to say a last farewell to them." We can only picture the sorrow she endured, since saying goodbye to a child is something that no parent should have to do. Edward continued to be enraged for many years. Mary had loved and lost throughout her life. There was only so much that the Queen's body could withstand after bidding farewell to her cherished husband and 3 boys. She thus realized her time was almost up when she was diagnosed with lung cancer. She died on March 24, 1953, and her loss was felt by many. Sadly, it didn't seem her son Edward was one of them. He never recovered because Mary had never forgiven him for stepping down. 10 weeks before her granddaughter's coronation, Queen Mary, 85, passed away peacefully in her sleep. He spoke of his mother, adding that the fluids in her veins have always been as icy cold as they are now in death, in a letter to Wallace Simpson. When she passed away, her estate was estimated to be worth £406,407.
If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon